Right, welcome to Let's Talk Texas, the official podcast of the House Republican Caucus. I am your host, Jordan Overturf, here to take you through weekly interviews with the members of the Texas House Republican Caucus. These are Republican state representatives serving in the Texas legislature for the 87th Texas legislative session. We're starting off the podcast by interviewing our female members to highlight Women's History Month and talk about the leadership roles that are being taken place by some of our newer members, some of our veteran members. We have got a lot of experience from our female lawmakers, and we want to hear from them specifically. What's it like serving in the legislature? What is the road that brought him here? And what are their priorities as they stare down the barrel of a fast-moving session? This week, we've got Chairwoman Stephanie Klick. She is chair of the House Committee on Public Health. She also is the most recent chair of the House Republican Caucus during the last interim session. So we talked to her at great length about the COVID response, her role on the vaccine panel, talking about the vaccine rollout here in Texas, how our growth has affected that, and specifically some of the bills that she expects to be talking about in her committee this session. So it's a great discussion with her. I really had a good time learning all things health here in Texas and how we are going to be better prepared for the future. Let's talk Texas. Let's start with the basic question. How is session going for you, Chairwoman Klick?
It is different than past sessions due to the pandemic, but our interim was not like any other interim either. It's like we were in session, but it was the interim.
Yeah.
Due to the pandemic.
Mm-hmm. And so for you serving as caucus chair over the interim and kind of trying to navigate all this stuff, I guess, how did you develop your priorities within your office to be able to serve your constituents, help other members? I mean, it's a lot to take on in an interim when normally, committees are just meeting, having generic discussions on bills and things like that.
Right. Well, during the interim, especially as we got closer to the November election, my priorities were to make sure that we kept our majority. And we did.
Yep. We sure did, and we appreciate those efforts. I guess on the other side of things, logistically, within your office, how are you communicating with constituents and things like that?
I did a number of teletown halls, particularly right after COVID hit Texas, and gave them resources, phone numbers that they could call if they needed help with a variety of items. My staff helped hundreds of people with the Workforce Commission. And so we did a lot of Zoom meetings, a lot of conference calls. In fact, my Mondays usually start at 7 a.m. because I'm on the expert vaccine allocation panel. That's usually a 3-hour conference call. And then have conference calls with my county, school superintendents, the local healthcare providers in our community. So it's been nonstop.
So obviously vaccines are a hot topic right now. Can you take us back, though, to how you got onto that panel and kind of the function of that expert vaccine panel?
That was an appointment by Commissioner of Health John Hellerstadt. There are 4 legislative members. The panel is made up of 17. Many of them are infectious disease experts, public health authorities, and I'm the only nurse. And, one of only 2 nurses in the state legislature.
And that is such a key perspective to provide because obviously our nurses have such a big lift, not outside of COVID and just their normal day-to-day. I can only imagine all the things that they have gone through. I guess real quickly, with your experience being a nurse, how has that helped you have conversations with fellow members and your constituents about this pandemic response and more the health side of things?
I think that it gives me more credibility with other members as well as constituents because I do have the education and background in which to explain things in a way that are easy to understand. Scary times for some folks that are at risk, but there are things that we can do to mitigate the risk and try to stay healthy.
So what are some of those things that you continue as vaccines are rolling out? What are the things you're telling your constituents in order to stay vigilant?
Number one, if they are in a high-risk population, please consider getting the vaccine. We know that the majority of the deaths and serious illness and bad outcomes are those over 65. And if they are in that high-risk group, then they need to seriously consider getting a vaccine. If they're younger and have conditions like diabetes or heart disease or kidney disease, they are also at very high risk even though they are younger. They too need to consider having a discussion with their doctor about getting the vaccine.
So, in your opinion, and serving on this panel, how would you rate the vaccine rollout here in Texas and the massive lift from the Texas military department, local public health departments, individual providers, pharmacies? I mean, there is a huge network of people helping make sure that Texans can get this vaccine.
There is, and it's important for people to remember that this is a worldwide pandemic. There are other states that are also struggling to get shots in arms, PPE dispensed, and taking care of people that are very, very ill. The approach that we took in Texas was a little bit different regarding vaccines. Mm-hmm. We prioritized healthcare providers because they were taking care of COVID patients all day, every day, in the hospital setting. So we prioritized them so that we could maintain our hospital capacity. And then we followed the epidemiology. Who is at greatest risk of dying or a bad outcome from this? And we prioritize those folks rather than different occupation groups. Everybody, whether you're a teacher, whether you're a bus driver, or whether you work at HEB, if you are older and have a comorbidity, you're at risk and need a vaccine, rather than pitting one industry against another, picking winners and losers.
So how big is this expert panel?
17 members.
Okay. And you're the only nurse on it?
There is one local public health authority out of Amarillo that is also a nurse.
Okay. So for your perspective, though, as a nurse, kind of what do you think are some of the priorities in terms of helping get Texas heading in the right direction? Is it vaccine rollout? Is it continued vigilance of the masks? Where do you professionally think the priority should be?
All the above.
There you go. Vigilance across the board, right?
Absolutely.
Excellent. Well, we don't want to spend all of our time talking about this stuff, and certainly you have a very you have a prolific career in the House, and the time that you've served. And I want to talk a bit about, it's Women's History Month. We're focusing on the female legislators first off with this caucus or with this podcast. So going back to when you first started to consider running for the House, what was the environment like? And as a female candidate, how did you kind of tackle the challenges as they came your way?
I actually began getting involved politically when I was in college.
Okay.
My husband came from a political family when we were dating and kind of introduced me to it. I'd not really been exposed to it before. I enjoyed it very, very much, like the policy side of it. And over the years, I became more politically involved because in order to change policy, you've got to elect good people to office. I served for 6 years as the Republican county chair in my county. During that time, we had the highest net Republican vote total in the country. So I learned a lot about how to run campaigns. And when there was an open seat in my district, I had ran many campaigns and had coordinated the effort county-wide for candidates. I put my hat in the ring. There were too few people that understood health policy, and I certainly have decades of experience in that.
So when was that first race that you decided to run?
I was elected in 2012.
Oh, okay. Popular time for Republicans to
Yes.
step up and get involved in the legislature. And your district, how do you describe it to people when you're trying to explain to them the area that you cover?
It is Northeast Tarrant County. I have the cities of Watauga, Richland Hills, North Richland Hills, Haltom City, and a portion of Fort Worth. This is an area I grew up in, attended school in this district, and have pretty much lived in the area or worked professionally in the area my entire life.
So you've really seen that area change dramatically over your lifetime.
I have.
And Texas, for that matter, changing drastically as far as it gains further prominence on the world stage. I mean, Texas has always, since the Battle of the Alamo, which we just celebrated over the weekend, it has had this prominence and been known the world over. But for you, you have your one little corner of Texas that you take care of in your constituents. Generally, what are the things that your constituents are concerned about, when you go back home and you talk to them about what's happening in the legislature?
I think most, the great thing about my district is a lot of folks, they grow up in the district. They don't go away. They stay in the community. And they care about jobs. They care about good schools for their kids and good quality of life. Not overburdened in the way of regulations and opportunities. Northeast Tarrant County is a great place to raise a family, own a business.
Yeah, I grew up in the Mesquite area, and my parents live in Carrollton now, so I travel that way quite a bit. I've lived in a few corners of Texas, and I will say that my time in Fort Worth holds a very special place in my heart. It is still one of those Texas cities that has been able to hold on to its identity through all the changes.
Yes.
So we hope that continues. Getting back to, being a female legislator, since 2012, you have gone on to be a chairwoman of committees, like we said, chair of the caucus. You're now chair of the House Committee on Public Health, which is arguably going to be one of the more important committees this session. I guess from your perspective, when they talk about females in the legislature, do you get caught up into that identity politics, or to your mind, are you just doing the work that your constituents set you here to do? You don't worry about any of that stuff.
Work that my constituents sent me to do. I've never supported a candidate because they were male or female. I choose the candidate that I'm going to support based on their qualifications.
Do you have a lot of young Texas women who do approach you and ask questions about public service?
Absolutely. And I also spend time each and every week talking to nursing students.
Oh, okay.
Many of them, especially at the graduate level, have to take policy classes. And as part of their project, they're supposed to reach out and talk to a legislator. And that's one of my favorite things to do.
So do you have those light bulb moments with them where, you can see that they're starting to get it. They understand, where policy comes into their day-to-day lives and things like that?
It does. And, healthcare is one of the most regulated industries we have. And so what we do in the legislature matters to their day-to-day ability to take care of patients.
So for your perspective as the chair of public health, how do you do that effectively, and maintaining those goals and helping kind of steer the legislature in the right direction in terms of healthcare policy?
One of the big things about Texas is we're a growing state. In fact, this kind of came up during the whole COVID-19 vaccine issue because the feds are still using 2018 population numbers. Well, since 2018, we've gained 1 million people. And so we are not getting as much vaccine from the feds allocated as we should. But also, we have a very diverse state. You've got nice urban areas, and then you have what I would call frontier land, rural areas as well. And we need to improve access to health care in Texas. And there are many things that we can do in that piece. But it's important that we make access and affordability available to our citizens of Texas.
Absolutely. I mean, affordability is going to be key as the state continues to grow. We're showing no signs of slowing down anytime soon. And the good news is that at least in some of these rural parts, some bigger companies are starting to lay the foundation there and move in those areas. It's just now we have the tough part of making sure that those areas have quality healthcare access and things like that. For you, I guess, obviously you're not going to commit to anything that isn't in your committee or on the House floor, but have you talked with your team in terms of healthcare policy that you yourself plan to support this session? Or can you talk to us a bit about the healthcare policy you've been reviewing for your own legislative purposes?
With us, being in a pandemic, there are a lot of things that we've had to do through waivers to be able to manage things during the pandemic. And quite frankly, telehealth is one example. Mm-hmm. Texas is one of the last states to put telehealth in place, and there were a number of waivers that the governor put in place during the pandemic. We need to make those permanent. Mm-hmm. The other thing that's kind of come on the forefront for telehealth and for education is broadband access. There are areas of the state that, they are left behind because they don't have that access. We had a number of professionals come to our state from other states to help care for Texans that had COVID-19. Mm-hmm. We streamlined the process from a licensing perspective. We need to make those things permanent as well. The governor reduced some of the regulations for advanced practice registered nurses to be able to care for people. We need to make those permanent as well. It improves access to care, and it also reduces the cost. It's forced us to think outside the box in how we deliver services and care.
Well, and when you have these discussions, I feel like people on the whole don't necessarily understand all of the stakeholders that come into play, especially as you start to bring telehealth and the broadband aspect. You start to bring the licensing agencies and folks coming from other states, other countries, where, whatever the situation is. I guess, can you give us a brief rundown of, some of the key stakeholders that you think are going to be a part of the conversation, be it doctors, nurses, the healthcare professionals on the front lines, as well as hospital administrators who understand the numbers, the dollars and cents and all that. Who are the stakeholders who you think will be very vocal in this process in discussing public health this session?
It will be a number of the professional organizations, supported, by doctors groups, nursing groups. There are also other professionals that are part of the healthcare team, occupational therapy, speech therapy. Some of the patients recovering from COVID-19 require therapies of all sorts to recover fully from this terrible virus, but also providers of services, whether they be at home health care, whether they be in the hospital. This virus has kind of touched all elements of healthcare.
Does that make it more difficult when you have to have a whole system approach, or does it make it better because everyone has to be invested in delivering solutions?
I think everyone has got a perspective and that we need their input. But, you have professional input, but everyday Texans have got stories as to how their life might have been different if we had fewer regulations throughout this that would have allowed them to more easily access care or even get testing.
So for the folks who want to follow along with the public health discussions going on in your committee, when does your committee typically meet? Everything's available live stream, correct?
Correct. We meet on Wednesday mornings, and usually, probably this week, we're going to start at 8 a.m. And we may have to recess to go to the floor, but we'll be back if we haven't finished our work for that day.
Is that committee using the public comment portal as well?
We are.
Okay, excellent. For those who don't know, the House public comment portal is where you can submit written testimony online if you can't make it down to testify in these hearings. So comments.house.texas.gov/home is where you want to go. It's hard to remember all that, right? But for those who want to engage, with everything that has been changed in the legislative process, or at least the safeguards that have been put in place, it seems like the legislature is working very hard to make sure that Texans still can be a part of this process. Is that how you feel in terms of the way the rules have been organized and as a committee chair?
Very much. And the comment portals, that's not something that we normally do. And quite frankly, after the pandemic's over, I hope that we continue that because folks do not have to go to the time and expense of traveling to Austin, can still weigh in on important issues.
And those comments are all public record. I believe they get posted with the hearing notices. So there will be evidence that your comments are registered, part of the public record, and have been received by that committee. So let's get away from some of the other stuff on the broader side. Are there for you specifically and kind of your goals that you set up with your team for this session? Are there any benchmarks that you've kind of set for yourself for this session?
Again, it will be a success after the session's over if we have, in many ways, several ways, improved access to care.
Access to care, a key issue to keep Texas strong moving forward. As far as access to care goes, you'd mentioned, making permanent some of the suspensions of regulations. Are there any steps where you've heard from healthcare professionals that maybe Texas needs to go a little bit further that are being considered policy-wise?
Oh, absolutely.
Any specifics you can remember off the top of your head?
I'll give you another example of a bill that I'm carrying this session, teledentistry. Mm-hmm. There are many areas of the state, they don't have a dentist. And it would open up access to those services if a hygienist were able to go out to do teeth cleaning and those sorts of things, but be able to stream back to the dentist that supervises them, to take a look at something that they may have observed during the course of doing their teeth cleaning.
Interesting. So they could just conference in and be able to have a consultation with the hygienist and the patient.
Right. And the setups with the cameras and all are really pretty phenomenal. Mm-hmm. And it might be that that patient does still need to go in for a tactile visit with the dentist, but kind of helps you prioritize who needs to get in quicker.
Absolutely. And the cleaning is a good step toward that. So it seems like Texas is kind of on the precipice of this, technological revolution in terms of providing access to care and things like that. Certainly we've seen the way it has influenced the way schools are being able to perform virtually and things like that. As we go forward, though, do you get a sense from your constituents that these telehealth options are going to become the new norm, or do you think it's going to evolve into a hybrid system where, we've got about half and half?
I think that there are some conditions and visits that you still need to do a face-to-face.
Mm-hmm.
But I will tell you that during the pandemic, I was speaking with one of the health plans, and they shared with me that there had been a 2,000% increase in telehealth visits for mental health.
Wow.
And the patient surveys that they've completed was a very high level of satisfaction. So I think that there may still be an interest in continuing after the pandemic some of those telehealth mental health visits. The patients were very comfortable in their own home, being able to discuss those mental health issues with the provider.
It seems like such a great solution that, any policy person will tell you to sit and think about it and ask any questions. As far as the telehealth stuff goes on the broad side of things, what are some concerns that folks have, and are there already steps being taken to fix some of those concerns?
I think some people are concerned about fraud.
Absolutely.
And I, share those concerns, but I do think that we can put monitoring in place to make sure that we can mitigate the risk of that. Mm-hmm. In the mental health area, we have a shortage of providers. And being able to do it via telehealth allows the providers that we have, it leverages their expertise in a way so that we're serving more patients.
This is great. I feel like Texas, after this, is going to be in such a better position and really coming out of this with a stepping stone toward the next iteration of these improvements that can be made. Before we get out of here, I want to make sure if folks want to interact back in your district, if they want to interact with your office or keep up to date on the latest happenings here in the legislature, what's the best way for them to be able to do that?
I have a Facebook page.
Yep.
I'm also on Twitter. My Twitter handle is Stephanie Klick, which is my name. And if they want to shoot me off an email, my email address is stephanie@stephanieklick.com. And Klick is Klick.
Perfect. In the caucus, anytime you are brought up, we immediately have your intro song picked out for you. So we'll start working on putting some backing tracks for the House floor activities. As you get called up, we'll start putting out a poll too to see where our intro songs rank on this. Chairwoman Klick, thank you so much. Anything else you think folks should know about the legislature before we get out of here?
Bill filing deadline is Friday, and it will very much speed up.
Yeah, there's a lot that's going to get done here in these last couple weeks. In your experience, you've been through the gauntlet quite a few times. Any tips or tricks to send out to your freshman members as they get ready for their first round of long nights on the House floor?
Pace themselves. Energy bars.
There you go. Energy bars, not MREs. I was talking to a rep who was like, yeah. Oh, Speaker Phelan was telling us about during the freeze, his kids were getting into the MREs and they loved it. So there you go. MREs or power bars on the House floor. Chairwoman Klick, thank you so much for your time today. Best of luck this session. We hope to have you back again real soon.